I never imagined I'd be left alone on a hospital bed mid-contraction, not by a doctor or a nurse, but by the woman I had vowed to spend my life with. Tanya stood by the doorway like a stranger, her arms folded across that designer coat I paid for last winter, her lips pressed into a hard line that I recognized now as final. "I can't afford to support a jobless man anymore," she said. Her voice was clinical, cold. "Get out." I remember blinking through the sweat on my forehead, through the pain twisting up my spine like a burning rope. I thought I'd misheard her. I thought she was joking, testing my patience in some twisted hormonal moment. But she wasn't. I could see it in her eyes, the same eyes that used to soften when I touched her stomach at night, whispering dreams to our unborn son. Those eyes were ice now, hollow and finished. "Tanya, this isn't the time." I managed to breathe, gripping the railing of the bed as another contraction began to claw through me. "Please." But she was already turning, already walking. I watched her heels click against the linoleum floor, red-bottomed like her anger, sharp like her silence. I stared at the spot she'd just occupied, still hoping she'd turn back, even as the pain swelled in my belly and my breath caught in a rasping sob. But the door didn't swing open again. It clicked shut. That was the last sound she gave me. The nurse returned moments later, cheerful and oblivious, like the whole room hadn't shifted into a graveyard. "Okay, Kieran, you're progressing beautifully. We'll have a baby here in no time." I nodded weakly, my mouth too full of bitter silence to speak. I didn't tell her Tanya had left. I didn't want to hear her sympathy. I didn't want to feel like a headline or a cautionary tale or one of those stories nurses tell each other during night shifts. I wanted to survive this moment for my son, for the promise of something better. And the bitter irony? Tanya didn't even know. She didn't know that the day before, less than 24 hours earlier, I'd inherited $30 million. My uncle, the man who raised me after my parents died in a car accident, had finally passed. The grief was fresh, but his final letter to me wasn't. He'd planned this for years. He left me his entire estate, the accounts, the trust, the company shares, $30 million and change. Enough to never worry again. Enough to build a life for this child. Tanya didn't ask how I was doing after he died. She didn't sit with me in the grief. She was too busy asking if I'd applied for any new jobs. As if money was the only marker of worth. I had planned to tell her that night, after the baby came. I had imagined us holding him together, the hospital room warm and glowing with joy, and then I'd say it. "Tanya, we're set. Everything changes today." But the only thing that changed was that she left before hearing it. Hours passed like dreams without edges. My body fought with itself, bone and blood wrestling for control. I squeezed through it, cried through it, breathed through it like the nurse said, and finally, after an eternity of aloneness, Ezra arrived. My son. The room was sterile and bright and humming with quiet victory. The nurse placed him in my arms, wrapped like a miracle, crying like the sky had cracked. I looked down into his face and saw all the love I'd lost and all the strength I'd need. I whispered his name, Ezra. It sounded ancient and powerful, and he blinked up at me like he understood. "Still no Tanya." The nurse looked around awkwardly. "Is your wife on her way back in?" "She won't be," I said softly, not explaining further. What was the point? What would it change? I held Ezra longer than I needed to. I memorized the shape of his nose, the curls already forming at the edge of his head, the way his fingers curled when they touched mine. And as I changed his diaper with shaking hands, cleaned his skin, held him against my bare chest like they taught in the prenatal classes, I made a promise. We would be just fine. Without her. I didn't know what the days ahead would look like. I didn't know how many nights I'd cry, how many times I'd replay her words, how often I'd wish I'd seen the signs sooner. But right then, I only knew this. I had him. He had me. And Tanya had nothing but her absence. The paperwork came later. The birth certificate. "Father's name?" the nurse asked. "Kieran Ashcroft," I said clearly. "Mother?" I paused. "Just mine, please." The nurse raised an eyebrow, but nodded. I signed where they told me to. No fanfare. No balloons. Just ink and silence, and a baby who deserved more than what she left behind. The nurse touched my arm. "Do you want to call someone? Let them know he's here." I shook my head. The only person who needed to know was already asleep on my chest, his breath small and brave. That moment Tanya walked out? That's when my life began. Not hers. Not ours. Mine. And his. Tanya and I met in our second year at university. I remember it vividly because it was the day my life stopped being simple. I was in the library, headphones on, surrounded by engineering textbooks and empty coffee cups. She walked past me wearing a red leather jacket and perfume that smelled like sharp citrus and heat. She sat across from me, not even glancing in my direction at first, and then, just as I turned the page of fluid mechanics and hydraulic machines, she looked up and said, "You look like you're solving the world." I blinked at her, surprised. "Trying to," I said, half smiling. She tilted her head and grinned. "Let me know when you do." That was Tanya, bold, magnetic, a little dangerous. She wasn't the type who waited for life to find her. She hunted it down, demanded it sparkle. I was the opposite. Focused. Structured. Raised by my uncle to believe in hard work, integrity, and modesty. I worked 2 jobs in those days, barista in the morning, janitor in the evenings, just to cover rent and tuition. She said she loved that about me. Said I was built different, that my ambition was sexy. Back then, I believed her. We moved in together 6 months later, into a tiny off-campus apartment with creaking floorboards and a fridge that groaned every time we opened it. I'd make eggs and toast in the morning. She'd dance barefoot to old R&B while brushing her teeth. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. She'd sit on the couch reading fashion blogs while I studied blueprints and wiring diagrams. We had dreams, hers dripping in designer tags, mine in schematics and spreadsheets. She said she didn't mind the struggle, that it made us stronger. I clung to that. Even when I was working double shifts and missing classes, even when I came home to find her complaining that our place was too small to breathe in. I believed we were building something worth all the exhaustion. The turning point came years later, after graduation, after I landed a job at a promising tech firm, after we got married at City Hall with gold bands and shaky hands. For a while, things were stable. I paid the bills, surprised her with flowers, booked weekend getaways we barely had time to take. She started a styling blog, picked up clients, posted perfect pictures of us smiling with wine glasses in hand. People called us goals. But when the company collapsed, when the funding dried up overnight and I came home with a cardboard box instead of a paycheck, that's when the rot began. At first, it was subtle. Tanya didn't say much, but I saw it in the way her smile shortened, the way she sighed louder than necessary when I mentioned job applications. I noticed her growing interest in luxury panels and networking events, her fixation on being seen, admired, followed. I tried to stay useful. Cooked more, cleaned more, even helped her shoot content for her brand. But every day I stayed unemployed, her eyes lost another spark of respect. Then came the barbs. Little comments slipped into everyday conversations like venom laced in honey. Real men don't sit at home watching the baby grow inside someone else. Maybe you should have studied finance instead of whatever that was. What are you providing now, Kieran? Because vibes don't pay rent. It hurt, not just because of what she said, but because I could see she meant it. That ambition she used to worship in me had turned into resentment. I was no longer her golden ticket. I was her expired pass. I tried not to show the cracks forming inside me. I kept applying, networking, doing contract work from home. But she didn't see effort. She only saw lack. The part that burns the most? I was planning to propose to her again. Not legally. We were already married, but spiritually, emotionally. I wanted to renew our vows. Make it new. Make it real again. I had even picked out a ring. A sapphire, not because it was flashy, but because it reminded me of the night sky over our first camping trip, the one where she said, "I feel safest when I'm with you." But that wasn't true anymore. I had become a symbol of her disappointment, a man reduced to what I didn't have. She never once asked what I was doing. Never asked how many hours I stayed up revising my resume, or how many rejection emails I swallowed with fake optimism. She didn't wait for me to succeed. She didn't believe I would. I had received the inheritance news 3 days before Ezra was due. My uncle's attorney called and said, "He wanted you to have it all. You earned it." I was stunned. I thought of how proud my uncle would have been. I thought of showing Tanya the trust documents, the wire transfers, the portfolio balances. I imagined her tears, her relief, the way she'd leap into my arms and apologize for ever doubting me. But I hesitated. I wanted the timing to be perfect. I decided I'd surprise her at the hospital, give her our son, then give her the life she always wanted. A new beginning, a new chapter. She didn't wait to read it. She left me in the worst moment of my life, not knowing that the best moment was minutes away. She thought she was walking away from a burden. She had no idea she'd walked away from a millionaire, from the man who was about to give her everything. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't chase her. I held my son, felt his heartbeat against mine, and whispered, "She left, little man. But we're still here." And that was enough. The envelope came on a Thursday. I remember because I had just come back from a walk. Ezra nestled in his carrier, his tiny body pressed to my chest, fast asleep. The air had that early spring bite to it, just enough chill to wake you up, but warm enough to make you hopeful. I needed that walk. Needed the wind against my skin and the reminder that the world was still spinning, even if mine had stopped just days before. There it was, tucked beneath a stack of circulars and baby product flyers. A large, cream-colored envelope with the gold-embossed seal of Harlan and Pritchard, my uncle's longtime legal firm. My stomach tightened. I knew what it was. I'd been expecting it, in a vague, unspoken way, ever since the call about his passing. Still, holding it in my hands made everything real. My uncle, James Ashcroft, was really gone. I sat down at the kitchen table, the one Tanya once demanded we replace because it wasn't modern enough, and laid Ezra next to me in his bassinet. His little fists flexed in his sleep, and I touched his cheek with the back of my knuckle. "You're about to find out who helped raise your dad," I whispered, "and just how much he believed in us." I opened the envelope with slow, deliberate fingers. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents, each one neatly clipped and tabbed. But there, right at the top, was the letter, handwritten, dated 2 weeks before he died. "Kieran, if you're reading this, I'm finally free of this failing body. Don't cry for me. You gave me more joy than most fathers get. You were the son I never had, even if the world didn't see you that way. I've watched you struggle with dignity, work with integrity, love with loyalty. I never had much to give you before, but now, I can leave you something worthy of the man you are. My estate, my assets, and the entire Ashcroft Trust portfolio, 30 million in total, are yours. Not just because you're my blood, because you earned it. Don't waste it proving yourself to people who never saw you clearly. Use it to build something. Raise that boy well. You were always enough. Remember that. James." I sat there, stunned. I read the letter 3 times, my hand gripping the edges so tightly I left creases in the paper. $30 million. Liquid assets. Portfolio holdings. Property deeds. And all of it mine. I wasn't broke. I wasn't failing. I wasn't the man Tanya had accused me of being when she left. I had become everything she claimed to want. Everything she used to admire. The irony carved itself deep into my chest. I had waited, held on to that announcement like a surprise proposal, like something beautiful to share when we were whole again. I had imagined handing her this letter, placing it on her lap while she held our son in her arms. I thought she'd cry. I thought she'd wrap her arms around me and say she never doubted me. But she had. She left before I could give her the news. She walked out with nothing more than a cruel sentence and the sound of her heels clicking toward a future without me. She didn't ask why I'd been calm that week, why I hadn't panicked about the bills, why I hadn't fought when she stopped making eye contact. She assumed, and she judged, and she left. I flipped through the rest of the documents. Bank accounts were already set up. A private investment consultant was on retainer. Even a property in Fairview had been transferred to my name, a lake house my uncle used to take me to during summers. He thought of everything, planned it all down to the last decimal and signature. Tanya didn't know, because Tanya never cared to ask. I sat back in my chair, Ezra stirring slightly in his bassinet beside me, and for the first time in what felt like years, I smiled. It wasn't smug. It wasn't vengeful. It was relief. Peace. A quiet recognition that I wasn't the failure I'd been made to feel. I was a man with options, with power, with freedom. I looked at Ezra, who blinked up at the ceiling with that newborn curiosity, and I thought about the future. Not the flashy kind Tanya drooled over, the private jets and gold-plated soap dishes, but the kind built on purpose. A future where Ezra never had to see his father broken. Where I could take my time, heal, build a legacy. Maybe not the one Tanya wanted, but one that mattered. I carefully folded the letter back into its envelope and tucked it away in my top drawer. I didn't want it framed. I didn't need to flaunt it, but I wanted to keep it close. Proof, not just of the money, but of who I really was to the one man who saw me clearly. I looked around the kitchen, the same kitchen Tanya used to call too humble. The cabinets were outdated. The tiles cracked in 2 places. The fridge door stuck unless you yanked it. But as Ezra let out a soft coo and kicked his feet, I realized I didn't need a mansion to feel rich. I had clarity. I had my son, and I had enough. So no, Tanya didn't wait. She didn't see the value in staying. But she didn't take anything that mattered with her. In fact, she walked away right before everything changed. And I didn't need to chase her. I didn't need to explain anything, because soon she'd find out on her own. The labor room was so bright it felt almost artificial, like I'd been dropped into a stage play, one where the main character gets left in the wings while the spotlight glares down without mercy. The walls were a muted gray, but under the fluorescent lights, they seemed to glow with an emotionless chill. Medical equipment hummed lowly beside me, wires and monitors blinking rhythmically, but I barely registered any of it. All I could feel was the dull emptiness that spread through the room after Tanya left. And the ache, not just from the contractions, but from the hollow she carved in her absence. Nurses came and went, adjusting things, offering words of encouragement, mistaking the tightness in my throat for pain rather than the grief it was. They asked me how I was holding up. I nodded, whispered fine, even though nothing about that moment felt remotely fine. The hours dragged. I kept glancing toward the door, half out of instinct, half out of a deluded hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd return, that she'd burst in apologizing, saying she'd been scared or overwhelmed or confused, that her eyes would soften and she'd squeeze my hand and say, "Let's bring our baby into this world together." But the door never opened for her again. I gritted my teeth through wave after wave of pain. Sweat drenched my forehead and pooled at the base of my neck. The contractions came harder, closer together, and the nurse, Claire, I think her name was, looked down at me with a reassuring smile. "You're doing amazing. Baby's almost here. Just a little longer, okay?" I nodded, breath short, heart heavier than it had ever been. And then I pushed, and pushed, and when the final, breath-snatching push wrung every last bit of strength from my body, there was silence. Just for a second. Then the cry came. Ezra's cry. It pierced the sterile air, raw and pure and alive. A sound that split through the ache. A sound that reminded me why I had endured all of it. Claire cradled him in her arms, cleaned him gently, then placed him on my chest. He was warm and slick and perfect. His tiny body trembled slightly as he adjusted to the world outside, and when his cheek brushed my skin, everything else in the world fell quiet. I stared down at my son. Mine. Born into a world already missing one parent, but he had me. That would be enough. "Hi," I whispered, choking on the tears I hadn't realized I'd been holding back. "Hi, little one. You made it." His fingers curled slightly, brushing my chest. His eyes, barely open, seemed to flicker with something ancient, like he already knew more than I did. "I'm sorry she's not here," I said, my voice shaking. "But I am, and I'm not going anywhere." The nurses moved around me, preparing documents, checking vitals, all moving in the quiet efficiency of people who'd seen too many beginnings and too many abandonments to act surprised by either. No one asked again where Tanya had gone. Maybe they guessed. Maybe they knew. Or maybe they saw too many fathers' ghost pregnancies to expect it to be the mother. Whatever the reason, they didn't press. They just let me hold my boy. Later that evening, after the initial rush faded and the silence returned, I changed Ezra's diaper for the first time. My hands were trembling. I'd watched videos, read articles, taken the classes, but none of it prepared me for how delicate and real it felt in that moment. His legs kicked, his tiny mouth yawned, and I laughed softly through the nerves. I managed it. Not perfectly, but I did it. I swaddled him as best I could, then sat in the reclining chair by the bed. Ezra nestled against my chest. I could feel his breathing slow, his body sinking into sleep. I looked down at him, studying every detail, the swirl of hair on his head, the dimple in his chin, the small furrow in his brow like he already had questions for the world. "You won't remember this," I murmured, "but I will." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to rage, to scream, to hurl curses at the door where Tanya had once stood. But holding Ezra, I didn't feel anger. I felt a strange kind of clarity. Tanya had done me a favor. She had removed herself before her absence could teach our son resentment. A nurse returned with a clipboard. "We'll need you to sign the birth certificate," she said gently. "Do you want to list the mother's name?" I stared at the paper. Name of child, Ezra Ashcroft. Father, Kieran James Ashcroft. I left the mother's name blank. She didn't earn the space. The nurse hesitated for a second, then nodded in understanding. No judgment, just acceptance. When she left, I sat back down and looked out the window. The city lights twinkled like stars had fallen just to watch Ezra sleep. I closed my eyes, let the exhaustion wash over me, and whispered one more promise. I won't let him need you. Because he wouldn't. He had me, and I had him. And the woman who left us mid-contraction? She didn't just walk out on a hospital room. She walked out on the very best parts of her own life. And I wouldn't let her walk back in. The labor room was so bright it felt almost artificial, like I'd been dropped into a stage play, one where the main character gets left in the wings while the spotlight glares down without mercy. The walls were a muted gray, but under the fluorescent lights, they seemed to glow with an emotionless chill. Medical equipment hummed lowly beside me, wires and monitors blinking rhythmically, but I barely registered any of it. All I could feel was the dull emptiness that spread through the room after Tanya left. And the ache, not just from the contractions, but from the hollow she carved in her absence. Nurses came and went, adjusting things, offering words of encouragement, mistaking the tightness in my throat for pain rather than the grief it was. They asked me how I was holding up. I nodded, whispered fine, even though nothing about that moment felt remotely fine. The hours dragged. I kept glancing toward the door, half out of instinct, half out of a deluded hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd return. That she'd burst in apologizing, saying she'd been scared or overwhelmed or confused. That her eyes would soften and she'd squeeze my hand and say, "Let's bring our baby into this world together." But the door never opened for her again. I gritted my teeth through wave after wave of pain. Sweat drenched my forehead and pooled at the base of my neck. The contractions came harder, closer together, and the nurse, Claire, I think her name was, looked down at me with a reassuring smile. "You're doing amazing. Baby's almost here. Just a little longer, okay?" I nodded, breath short, heart heavier than it had ever been. And then I pushed, and pushed. And when the final, breath-snatching push wrung every last bit of strength from my body, there was silence. Just for a second. Then the cry came. Ezra's cry. It pierced the sterile air, raw and pure and alive. A sound that split through the ache, a sound that reminded me why I had endured all of it. Claire cradled him in her arms, cleaned him gently, then placed him on my chest. He was warm and slick and perfect. His tiny body trembled slightly as he adjusted to the world outside, and when his cheek brushed my skin, everything else in the world fell quiet. I stared down at my son. Mine. Born into a world already missing one parent, but he had me. That would be enough. "Hi," I whispered, choking on the tears I hadn't realized I'd been holding back. "Hi, little one. You made it." His fingers curled slightly, brushing my chest. His eyes, barely open, seemed to flicker with something ancient, like he already knew more than I did. "I'm sorry she's not here," I said, my voice shaking. "But I am, and I'm not going anywhere." The nurses moved around me, preparing documents, checking vitals, all moving in the quiet efficiency of people who'd seen too many beginnings and too many abandonments to act surprised by either. No one asked again where Tanya had gone. Maybe they guessed. Maybe they knew. Or maybe they saw too many fathers' ghost pregnancies to expect it to be the mother. Whatever the reason, they didn't press. They just let me hold my boy. Later that evening, after the initial rush faded and the silence returned, I changed Ezra's diaper for the first time. My hands were trembling. I'd watched videos, read articles, taken the classes, but none of it prepared me for how delicate and real it felt in that moment. His legs kicked, his tiny mouth yawned, and I laughed softly through the nerves. I managed it. Not perfectly, but I did it. I swaddled him as best I could, then sat in the reclining chair by the bed. Ezra nestled against my chest. I could feel his breathing slow, his body sinking into sleep. I looked down at him, studying every detail, the swirl of hair on his head, the dimple in his chin, the small furrow in his brow like he already had questions for the world. "You won't remember this," I murmured. "But I will." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to rage, to scream, to hurl curses at the door where Tanya had once stood. But holding Ezra, I didn't feel anger. I felt a strange kind of clarity. Tanya had done me a favor. She had removed herself before her absence could teach our son resentment. A nurse returned with a clipboard. "We'll need you to sign the birth certificate," she said gently. "Do you want to list the mother's name?" I stared at the paper. Name of child, Ezra Ashcroft. Father, Kieran James Ashcroft. I left the mother's name blank. She didn't earn the space. The nurse hesitated for a second, then nodded in understanding. No judgment, just acceptance. When she left, I sat back down and looked out the window. The city lights twinkled like stars had fallen just to watch Ezra sleep. I closed my eyes, let the exhaustion wash over me, and whispered one more promise. "I won't let him need you." Because he wouldn't. He had me, and I had him. And the woman who left us mid-contraction? She didn't just walk out on a hospital room. She walked out on the very best parts of her own life. And I wouldn't let her walk back in. The next morning, just as the sky outside the hospital room turned a delicate shade of pink, Tanya walked in. Not rushed, not remorseful. She didn't come in with tears or apologies or even feigned concern. No. She came in with a coffee cup from the cafe downstairs, sunglasses perched on her head, and perfume I didn't recognize trailing behind her like a signature. The scent hit me first, strong, floral, expensive. Then the smirk. The one she used when she thought she was holding the winning card. But she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a man. Tall, clean-cut, dressed like he had walked off a fashion magazine spread. Navy suit, polished brown loafers, no tie, but a gold watch gleamed at his wrist. My watch. The same one Tanya bought me last year for my birthday. I had worn it to our anniversary dinner. Now it sat on this stranger's wrist like a declaration. I didn't move, didn't speak. Ezra was in my arms, still asleep, his tiny breaths rising and falling against my chest. I adjusted the blanket around him and kept my eyes on Tanya. She took a sip of her coffee and gave a small, theatrical sigh. Wow, you look better than I expected. I didn't answer. She glanced down at Ezra, then shrugged. Cute. Still, I said nothing. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a rise. I wasn't going to let her drag the silence into something twisted and theatrical. That's when she did it. This, she said, gesturing to the man beside her, is my husband. Liam. My what? Husband? Liam gave a stiff, uncomfortable nod. His eyes darted between me and the baby like he wasn't sure where to look. I saw it in his posture, the slight lean back, the sudden sweat at his brow. He knew something was off. Tanya continued. We got married yesterday. Quick courthouse thing. Very low-key. My throat didn't tighten. My stomach didn't turn. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. The cruelty, the shallowness, the gleaming surface with nothing underneath. I glanced back at Ezra. He stirred slightly and let out a soft breath. That sound grounded me. Then Liam's eyes locked onto mine. He froze. Recognition bloomed across his face like a sunrise of dread. Wait, he said, taking a small step forward. You're my CEO? Kieran Ashcroft. The moment the words left his lips, Tanya's smirk faltered. She turned to look at him sharply. What are you talking about? Liam stared at me, then at her. You said your ex was some broke tech guy. You never said he owned Ashcroft Holdings. She blinked. That's not possible. He is your boss, I said quietly, my voice steady. Technically your husband's boss now. Although, probably not for much longer. Liam stepped back, eyes wide. This can't be right. Oh, it's very right, I said. I was going to tell her about the inheritance after Ezra was born, but she walked out before I got the chance. Tanya looked at me now like she was seeing a ghost she hadn't finished burying. Her mouth opened, then closed. The silence between us stretched long and bitter. I stood up slowly, adjusting Ezra in my arms. He blinked up at the room, then nestled closer to my chest. You married my intern, I said, nodding toward Liam. Nice choice. Liam looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. Tanya's face flushed. She tried to recover, reaching for that haughty tone she used when she wanted control. Well, maybe if you had been a real man and kept a job, I wouldn't have had to it. You left me during labor, I cut in. You didn't just quit a marriage. You abandoned your child. And now you want to waltz back in with a ring on your finger and a man wearing my watch. Liam immediately slipped the watch off and placed it on the table. I didn't know, he muttered. I swear, I didn't know she was married when we started. Did you know yesterday? I asked. He didn't answer. The door opened again. A nurse peeked in. Mr. Ashcroft? Just here to check on Oh. Her gaze swept across the room, immediately sensing the tension. I turned to her calmly. Could you please call hospital security? We've got 2 guests here who need to leave. Tanya's mouth dropped open. You're not serious. I am. This room is for people who belong here. You don't. Wait, can we just talk? Please. Her tone had changed now. The confidence cracked. I already did all the talking I needed to, I said. And you did the walking. The nurse nodded, stepping back out to make the call. Tanya's eyes flickered, realization setting in. Her gaze dropped to Ezra one more time, and for a moment, just a flicker of something like regret passed across her face. Too late. Security arrived minutes later. 2 calm, expressionless men in dark uniforms. They didn't touch her, didn't raise their voices, just stood patiently by the door and gestured. Liam left first without a word, avoiding my eyes. Tanya followed, heels clicking in a much different rhythm this time. A defeated one. When the door clicked shut behind them, I let out a long breath. Ezra yawned. I kissed the top of his head and whispered, "Don't worry, son. That was the last time she gets to enter your world on her terms." The hospital room returned to silence once the door shut behind Tanya and her new husband. It was a different kind of silence now, not heavy or aching, but clean, like something had been aired out. Like peace, honest and earned, had finally found a corner in the mess. Ezra blinked up at me, his lips twitching into what might have been a smile or just gas, but I took it as approval. I sat down again, cradling him, his head resting against my chest. For a long moment, I just breathed. No rage, no gloating, just stillness. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I reached for it and saw an email from legal. "Welcome, Mr. Ashcroft. Your transition to majority shareholder is complete. All signatory rights active. Let us know if you'd like to schedule your first executive board meeting." I smiled faintly. The firm my uncle built, Ashcroft Holdings, was officially mine now. I was the CEO, not in theory. In reality, I thumbed through a few more emails from trustees, financial officers, and board advisors. A few congratulated me. Most just wanted to schedule calls. It was a whirlwind waiting to happen, but none of it compared to the small, warm weight in my arms. The boardroom could wait a day. Still, I knew the next move had to be precise. Liam, her husband, had only just started at our company. I remembered him from the orientation meeting 3 months ago. Bright, cocky, clean resume. A referral from one of our partner universities. I hadn't interacted with him much, just signed off on his onboarding. I had no idea he was seeing my wife behind my back. That irony wasn't lost on me. I wasn't angry anymore, not the way I had been. What I felt now was focus. Cold, efficient focus. I wouldn't lash out or make threats. I would do what Ashcrofts do best, handle business. I pulled up his personnel file, scrolled through his credentials, and added a note. Review status, conflict of interest pending. Not a firing. Not yet. Let the facts speak. I sent a quick text to the head of HR. We need to meet about a new hire who failed to disclose a conflict. I'll bring documentation. Then I leaned back and held Ezra closer. The next morning, we were discharged from the hospital. I carried my son out, his car seat clicking into place with a sense of finality. No fanfare. No balloons. Just me, him, and a quiet ride back to our apartment. The nursery Tanya once decorated in sage green and gold remained untouched. Her frame quotes were still on the wall. I would change that soon. Ezra slept most of the day while I moved with silent purpose, packing her belongings into boxes. I didn't trash them. I wasn't that kind of man. But I packed with care, precision, and a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Jewelry she left on the vanity. Hair products lined up like she was coming back. Wedding photos still on the dresser. I boxed them all. Her closet was emptied in under an hour. The house felt wider without her. Not emptier. Just roomier. Like it could breathe again. Later that evening, I went to the office for the first time since the birth. My assistant, Kelsey, looked startled when I walked in holding Ezra in a soft sling across my chest. "Kieran." "Congratulations," she said, her voice full of warmth and surprise. "Is this Ezra?" I said. "My son." She smiled wide. "He's beautiful. And tiny. Like all good beginnings," I replied. The boardroom wasn't far from the nursery now. Everything had changed. I stepped into the executive suite and logged into my terminal. The board had sent over projections and quarterly reports, but I was focused on something else, security footage. I requested a review of employee access logs, internal messages, and activity timelines. Liam's name popped up repeatedly. Late-night check-ins. Weekend collaborations. Video conferences with Tanya listed as a personal contact on his login credentials, unofficial and unsanctioned. There it was. I didn't need a scandal. I didn't need a press release. I just needed the truth. The pattern. The timeline. Evidence. I drafted an internal memo requesting his voluntary resignation. The tone was professional. Firm. Non-negotiable. I included a clause offering severance if he agreed to sign a non-disparagement agreement. I didn't want drama. I wanted closure. By the time I returned home that night, Ezra was asleep in his bassinet beside the window. I stared down at him and saw my entire world wrapped in a cotton blanket with tiny blue stars. I brushed a hand across his hair and exhaled. This was the new boardroom. These were the decisions that mattered now. I sat down at my desk and opened a new document. It wasn't a will or a strategy plan. It was a letter to Ezra, a legacy. I told him about the day he was born, about the silence, about the strength it took to hold him when everything else fell away. I told him he saved me, and I meant it. When I finished writing, I looked out the window. The city lights blinked in the distance, but our apartment was quiet. I wasn't the man Tanya thought she left. I wasn't broken. I wasn't bitter. I was becoming. And tomorrow, I'd begin again. That night, while Ezra slept swaddled beside my bed, I sat at the dining table in silence, laptop open, legal documents spread before me like fallen soldiers. The overhead light buzzed softly above and outside. The city moaned in its usual rhythm, horns in the distance, the hum of passing cars, the occasional bark of a restless dog. Inside, though, was still, almost sacred. I sipped from a glass of water and stared at the cursor blinking at the bottom of the screen. The form was simple, just a checkbox and a signature. But what it represented wasn't. I clicked. The divorce petition was filed at 9:47 p.m. I didn't do it in anger. There was no triumph in it, no vengeance humming beneath my skin. I didn't blast music or mutter curses under my breath. I just filed it the way you'd remove a rotting floorboard from a house you still wanted to save. Carefully, decisively, with purpose. Tanya was no longer a part of the structure I was rebuilding. After that, I moved on to the next document. Custody. I wasn't going to make this a war. I wasn't interested in dragging Ezra through a battlefield of bitterness and courtrooms. But I was going to protect him. I was going to make sure that the woman who walked out on her newborn son mid-contraction wouldn't be allowed to waltz back into his life the moment it became convenient or photogenic. My attorney, Thomas Vance, had already prepared the filing. Sole custody. Emergency protective order optional, if needed. I hadn't asked for it yet. But if Tanya so much as tried to manipulate the situation or claim rights she hadn't earned, I would press that button like a steel trigger. After that came the bank accounts. I logged into every joint account we shared. I knew Tanya hadn't expected me to move quickly. She always assumed I was slow to act, thoughtful, cautious. She never realized that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means calculation. First, I removed her as an authorized user on our credit lines. Then I revoked her access to our checking and savings accounts. She'd already drained most of our emergency fund before she left, probably funding her surprise wedding. But I wasn't going to let her bleed another cent. Then, finally, I changed every password tied to anything that mattered: banking, business, utilities, even the smart thermostat. I locked the digital doors, then turned to the physical ones. The next morning, I drove to the house. Our house. The one Tanya had begged for: open floor plan, high ceilings, quartz countertops. We'd only lived there a year before everything collapsed. Now it felt more like a memory than a home. I parked in the driveway, Ezra strapped into his car seat behind me, still sleeping. I walked up to the front door and slid the new key into the lock. The deadbolt turned with a soft click, and I stepped inside. The air smelled like lavender and lemon cleaner. She must have hired someone before she left. I walked through each room slowly, flipping lights on and off, testing windows, checking corners. I wasn't looking for burglars. I was looking for closure. Her shoes were still lined up by the door. Her vanity still had makeup brushes and tubes of gloss lined up like trophies. I didn't touch them. I didn't need to. Everything here had already lost its meaning. In the kitchen, I found the box she used to keep her jewelry in, mahogany, velvet-lined, always locked. I opened it and placed it gently on the marble countertop. Inside were diamond earrings, 3 gold chains, and the silver bracelet I bought her for our 3rd anniversary. I left it all there. Then I pulled out a note card, scribbled my final message, and left it next to the box. You left me while I was in labor. Please don't forget what day that was. I won't. I closed the box and walked out without looking back. I didn't slam the door. I didn't stomp my feet or scream into the wind. I just locked it behind me, reset the security system, and walked back to the car. Ezra stirred softly as I opened the door. I reached back, adjusted his blanket, and smiled at his tiny, scrunched-up face. You're safe now, I whispered. Back at the apartment, I received the first call from Tanya since her dramatic hospital reappearance. I let it ring the first time, and the second. But the third? I picked up. Not out of curiosity, but closure. Her voice came through hesitant, fragile. Kieran. I didn't speak. I didn't know you'd react like this, she said. I thought. I don't know. I was scared. I panicked. I thought we were done, and I made a mistake. You got married the next day, I said flatly. You didn't panic. You planned. That wasn't how it was supposed to go. You left me in a hospital bed while I was pushing out your son, I interrupted. There is no version of that makes sense. Not even in hell. She went quiet. I could hear her breathing. Hear the faint creak of whatever chair she was curled into. Maybe it was the couch in the hotel she was likely living out of now. Maybe she thought she could fix this. I want to see Ezra, she whispered. No, I said. You don't get to want now. You had that chance, and you traded it for perfume and a stranger. I didn't know you were rich, powerful, set for life. I scoffed. Exactly. You didn't know. Because you didn't ask. I hung up before she could answer. Then I blocked her. That was the last time I heard Tanya's voice directly. From that moment on, she became a footnote. An entry in a legal file. A lesson I'd never need to learn twice. And I slept better that night than I had in months. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. I was standing in the kitchen, Ezra balanced on my forearm, his bottle cradled in the crook of my elbow as he drank lazily, eyelids fluttering. The stove beeped behind me, something boiling over. I didn't care. I was focused on Ezra's face, that tiny crease in his brow when he drank like he was solving a puzzle. Then my phone rang. Private number. I nearly declined it, assuming it was Tanya calling from someone else's phone again, trying a new tactic. But something in me paused. I shifted Ezra to my other arm and swiped to accept. Kieran. A woman's voice. Soft, trembling. Not Tanya's. Yes. Who is this? There was a shaky breath on the other end. It's Martha. Tanya's mom. I didn't respond right away. The name hit like an echo from a different life. I hadn't heard from her in years. She'd always been polite, reserved, never close but never cruel. She was the kind of mother who always looked like she was bracing for disappointment. I never thought she liked me much, but she had never been unkind. What do you want, Martha? I asked. Her voice cracked. I just found out. About the birth. About everything. I stared down at Ezra, who had drifted off mid-bottle, his lips still puckered slightly. How much do you know? She told me a version of things, Martha said, but something didn't sit right. So I asked around. Then I saw the footage. I stiffened. Footage. She tried to spin it, Kieran. Said you abandoned her emotionally. Said she had no support. But then someone sent me a clip from the hospital lobby cameras. You alone. Holding the baby. No one in the hallway. And the timestamp. Her voice broke again. She left while you were giving birth, she whispered. She actually left. I said nothing. Martha continued, her voice clearer now. I raised her better than that. Or I thought I did. Kieran, I am so sorry. I didn't know. I sat down slowly, holding Ezra close. He didn't stir. His breath stayed soft and steady. She came back the next morning, I said, my voice quiet. With a man wearing my watch and a new ring on her hand. Called him her husband. Oh God. She stood there like nothing had happened. Like Ezra wasn't the cost of her escape. There was a long pause on the line. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, Martha said eventually. But I needed you to know that I believe you. And that I'm sorry. For what she did. For not calling sooner. For assuming she was still the girl I raised. She's not, I said. Not anymore. I know. But Ezra, he still has family here. If he ever wants to know us, you have my number. I appreciate that. And for what it's worth, she added, voice growing firm, I told her not to contest custody. I told her if she did, she'd be dragging a lie into court, and it would only make things worse. I let the words hang in the air. She meant them. That much was clear. Thank you for calling, Martha. She hesitated, then added softly, you're a better father than I ever gave you credit for. Then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time. Ezra snuggled against me, his weight grounding me. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just felt the strange calm that comes from finally being seen. Later that night, Thomas, my attorney, called. I answered on the first ring. She's filed a custody motion, he said without preamble. Contesting your petition for sole guardianship. She's claiming emotional distress led her to momentarily separate, but that she's fully committed now. I snorted. Of course she is. She's also requesting joint access to the house. Claims she didn't agree to you changing the locks. She didn't agree to leaving during labor either. I'm already drafting our response, Thomas said. We have the hospital staff statements, your medical records, timestamps, and the security footage. She's not going to win this, Kieran, but she's going to try, and it's going to get ugly. I'm not worried, I said. Just annoyed she still thinks she has any ground to stand on. Custody hearings don't favor inconsistency. Judges want stability. She gave you that on a silver platter the minute she walked out. I glanced at Ezra. He's going to stay with me. That's not negotiable. Thomas's voice softened. And he will. Let her throw every argument she has. In the end, the truth won't bend. After we hung up, I held Ezra a little closer. The idea that she'd try to claw her way back into his life after vanishing during his first breath was absurd, but not surprising. Tanya never accepted consequences. She viewed life like a poker game: bluff, bet, raise. But she forgot that some players fold. Others build empires in silence. And I had done both. I laid Ezra in his crib and stood watching him for a long time. His fingers twitched in sleep. His chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm. This was the only court that mattered. The only verdict that counted. Did he feel safe? Did he feel loved? Yes. Tanya could try whatever legal gymnastics she wanted. She could wear white in court, cry on cue, spin her story to make me sound like the villain. But she could never unwrite what she did. She didn't just walk away. She walked away while I was breaking open to bring our child into the world. And no court in this country was going to forget that. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in energy. It was clinical: white walls, smooth benches, beige carpeting. No one was there for justice. They were there for procedure, for performance. A stage dressed in legal language. I sat on the left side, Ezra's stroller beside me. He was dozing peacefully, bundled in a navy blanket with cartoon stars. He had no idea the air around him crackled with tension. Or maybe he did. Maybe he was just too wise to let it show. Tanya sat on the other side of the room. I hadn't seen her since the day I called security to escort her and Liam from the hospital. Now she sat with her lawyer, wearing a cream suit too bright for a custody hearing, hair pinned perfectly. She wore pearls, always her favorite when she wanted to look innocent. Her hands were folded in her lap, expression carefully rehearsed. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Ezra, like she was about to ask for something she'd never earned. The judge entered. We stood, then sat. Formalities read in a voice that felt too casual for what this meant. Then it began. Petitioner, Kieran Ashcroft, seeks full legal and physical custody of the minor child, Ezra James Ashcroft. Respondent, Tanya Ashcroft, contest on the grounds of emotional duress and temporary absence. Both parties present. Present, I said clearly. Present, Tanya echoed, her voice syrup-sweet. Thomas stood beside me, calm as a surgeon. Tanya's lawyer, a man named Finch, rose first, painting a picture that made my stomach twist. He spoke of postpartum stress, fear, confusion. My client was overwhelmed. She made a difficult decision in a high-pressure moment, but she returned within 24 hours. That does not equate abandonment. It equates humanity. The judge, a lean woman with silver streaks in her hair and tired eyes, nodded but didn't smile. She was listening, but she wasn't buying everything. Then it was our turn. Thomas stood slowly, his voice even and deliberate. Your Honor, what the respondent describes as a temporary absence was, in fact, the desertion of her spouse in active labor. There was no medical emergency, no trauma, only a statement, recorded by hospital staff, in which she told Mr. Ashcroft, I can't afford to support a jobless man anymore. She left mid-contraction, returned married to another man. That is not stress. That is abandonment. Tanya's expression wavered just slightly. Thomas continued, we have hospital security footage, witness testimony from the attending nurse, and the record of her marriage license, dated 23 hours after the child's birth. He turned to me. I rose. I didn't need a script. I was alone in that room when my son was born, I said. She walked out while I was crying through contractions. I cut the cord myself. I fed him, changed him, registered his birth. She wasn't there. Not emotionally, not legally, not physically. She made her choice. I've made mine. I'm not keeping Ezra from his mother. I'm protecting him from a stranger. The judge nodded slightly and asked the clerk to roll the footage. A monitor played the black and white security clip. There I was, hunched over in a hospital gown, holding my side in pain. Tanya was near the door, purse in hand. Her voice didn't carry through the footage, but her expression did. Flat. Dismissive. She turned, walked away. The timestamp showed it. 37 minutes before Ezra's delivery. Silence thickened the room. When the lights flicked back on, Tanya was crying. Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, but even from across the room, I could tell the tears weren't remorse. They were reaction. I made a mistake, she sobbed. I was scared. I didn't think he'd forgive me. I thought we were over. But I came back. Doesn't that count for something? The judge finally leaned forward, lacing her fingers together. Mrs. Ashcroft, returning to a hospital with a new spouse does not display remorse. It displays closure on your terms. But parenting is not about terms. It's about consistency, reliability, and sacrifice. She turned toward me. Mr. Ashcroft, have you provided continuous care since the child's birth? Yes, Your Honor. Do you have the means to support him emotionally, physically, and financially? Yes. Do you object to supervised visitation for the mother under future review? No. Ezra deserves truth and choice, but he deserves stability first. The judge looked back at Tanya. Do you understand what this court is being asked to do? Yes, Tanya whispered. Then here is the court's decision. No pause. No deliberation. In the matter of custody for Ezra James Ashcroft, full legal and physical custody is awarded to the petitioner, Mr. Kieran Ashcroft. Visitation rights to the respondent, Mrs. Tanya Ashcroft, shall be supervised and reviewed quarterly. This ruling stands unless new evidence is presented that demonstrates sustained involvement and emotional consistency. A final strike of the gavel. Tanya crumbled. Her sobs echoed through the courtroom. But no one moved to comfort her. Not her lawyer. Not a friend. Not Liam, who wasn't even present. Her world was folding inward, and she knew it. I didn't watch her cry. I turned to Ezra, now waking up with a soft yawn. I knelt beside him and stroked his cheek. We're going home now, I whispered. I stood, thanked the judge, and left without looking back. In the hallway, reporters waited. Not for me. For Tanya. The footage had leaked. Her story was already becoming headlines. Mother walks out on husband mid-labor. I didn't feed it. I just walked past, Ezra cradled in one arm, dignity in the other. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even triumphant. I was free. We moved to the coast 3 months after the custody ruling. Just Ezra and me. No lawyers, no whispers, no lingering shadows of Tanya's perfume clinging to the walls. I chose a small town wedged between the cliffs and the ocean, where the houses were modest, the air smelled like salt and fur, and no one gave a damn about headlines. Here, I wasn't the man whose wife left him mid-labor. I was just Ezra's dad. The house we found had white shutters and a wraparound porch. A swing overlooked the sea. The paint peeled slightly, the floors creaked in the corners, but I didn't care. It was real. Ours. The first night we slept there, I laid Ezra in his crib and sat outside with a blanket over my shoulders, listening to the waves crashing below. I stared up at the sky, wide and star-drenched, and thought of my uncle. You left me with everything, and I finally know what to do with it. I didn't spend much of the $30 million. I never needed to. I'd grown up learning how to stretch pennies, how to patch jeans instead of buying new ones, how to boil rice 3 ways when the pantry got low. Old habits don't die. They mature. But I did use a portion of it to build something, to give the pain purpose. I launched the Ashcroft Foundation 2 towns over. A nonprofit in my uncle's name dedicated to supporting single fathers, underserved caregivers, and young parents abandoned by partners who broke when life asked for strength. We offered housing vouchers, legal aid, emotional support groups, and job reentry programs. I hired a team I trusted. I showed up every week. Not for the photos, but because the stories felt like my own. Because every time I saw a father walk through our doors with a diaper bag and a quiet panic in his eyes, I remembered myself. Ezra grew fast. By 6 months, he was already trying to sit up and babble like he had stories to tell. His laugh, it wasn't a sound. It was a cure. It melted every scar Tanya left behind. Sometimes, I'd catch myself watching him while he played with his stacking cups or tried to chew on the dog's tail, and I'd just whisper, "Thank you." To him, to the universe, to my uncle, maybe even to Tanya, in a strange way. Her leaving was the fire that burned away the rot. Word got back to me now and then about her. Tanya had moved twice since the trial. She'd started a short-lived podcast about healing through crisis, but it fizzled after a few episodes. Liam was long gone. He'd quietly resigned from Ashcroft Holdings and disappeared into anonymity. Tanya tried working retail for a while. Boutique shops, interior design consults, but nothing lasted. She filed 3 appeals for shared custody. All denied. I never responded. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. She wasn't part of our story anymore. She was the preface, poorly written and already torn out. One particular evening, I took Ezra to the beach. It was a ritual by then. I'd carry him on my hip, barefoot in the sand, while he squawked at seagulls and tried to grab the wind. He was 10 months old and bold, wanted to walk before he could balance, wanted to speak before his tongue caught up. That night, the sky burned with the kind of sunset poets pretend to describe but always get wrong. Gold bleeding into orange, the edges of the ocean catching fire. Ezra wriggled until I set him down, and then he waddled, arms out like wings, down the damp shoreline, his giggles floating through the breeze. I sat on the bench nearby, watching him. That moment didn't need music or a filter or a witness. It was perfect as it was. "You saved me, boy," I said aloud, my voice hushed and thick. "You gave me a reason to become." The tide lapped gently nearby, whispering back like it had heard. Maybe it had. Maybe the universe speaks to those who finally stop shouting. Ezra turned, his cheeks rosy, sand clinging to his knees. He toddled back to me, one fist clenching a seashell like treasure. I scooped him up and held him close. "I don't care what they say," I murmured. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And no one gets to rewrite that." Back home, I tucked him into bed, brushing his curls gently off his forehead. I read him a book, sang softly through the verses my uncle used to hum to me. Then I sat in my office, pulled out the journal I'd started the day Tanya left, and opened to the last blank page. He smiled at the waves tonight. My son, my heartbeat. And I realized I'm not healing anymore. I'm whole. I closed the journal, placed it on the shelf beside framed photos of Ezra and his many firsts. First bottle, first giggle, first beach day. No pictures of Tanya. Just the truth. And as I turned off the lights and stepped into the quiet of my coastal home, I felt it. Not relief. Not justice. But peace. The kind that doesn't knock. The kind you build with your own hands after someone walks out on you mid-contraction. The kind you earn when you choose to rise, quietly, steadily, fully. Ezra stirred once in his sleep. I leaned over, kissed his forehead. "I'm here," I whispered. "Always." And this time, there was no door waiting to close behind me. Just one wide open, facing the sea.